www.latenightinthemidlands.com. Become a member, be informed, and inform others. And by all means, subscribe. You could do that right at the bottom of the main page. We've got subscriptions, one-time donations. We are listener-supported, and we need you to support us for us to remain. And my guest is Lori Toye. After a few years away from the spotlight, internationally known author and channel, Lori Toye takes us back to the beginning on how this life of enlightenment first began. In her latest book, Teacher Appears, Lori is once again making herself available for speaking engagements and radio shows. Her new book, A Teacher Appears, a very interesting read, and she's going to tell us more about her background and how she got on this journey, and then we'll take it from there. So, Lori, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. Thank you so much.
Hi, Michael. Yes, thank you for having me as a guest on your show.
Oh, absolutely. I find this all very interesting, and I thought maybe we could start with you giving us a little more on the background, and how did this spiritual journey begin for you?
Well, I am from an extremely conventional background. That is very typical. I was raised in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, and of course I had never heard about meditation, reincarnation, even the word channeling from my background. But I was 22 years old, and I was the manager for an advertising department of a small weekly newspaper in the Pacific Northwest, and I'd been asked to go pick up an ad, and so I went out to go get the ad at a health food store, and I walked in the door, and the woman at the counter pointed her finger at me, and she said, "You have work to do for Master Saint Germain." And I asked her, I said, well, I was a bit perplexed. I said, "Who's Saint Germain?" And she said, "Well, come here, I'd like to show you his picture." So I followed her to her back office, and there on the wall hung a picture of the Master Saint Germain. And he honestly looked like someone that I had known before, although there wasn't any way that I could have, because the picture was obviously 19th century France, and someone that really was not a contemporary whatsoever. But for some reason I felt like that I knew him and recognized him.
Fascinating.
And then I asked her, I said, "Well, who is he?" And she said, "Well, Master Saint Germain is an ascended master." And I said, "Well, who is an ascended master? Or what is an ascended master?" And she handed me a pamphlet about ascended master teaching. And that is when I began to study the ascended master tradition, and she actually became one of my first teachers of that tradition.
And what exactly is that? What are you? What kind of practice is it?
Well, ascended masters are beings just like you and I, souls who have evolved to a point in their evolution where they have spiritually liberated or ascended from the need to even have a physical body. So they exist in other planes or dimensions of reality, in fourth and fifth dimension. And they then pledge as a group to help to serve humanity, so that humanity can also spiritually grow and evolve in their own process here.
I see. Now, you waited quite a while to tell your story, from what I understand here, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it now. So you were able to actually connect. I know, was this on the other side? Was this connection?
Well, yes. Interestingly, when I began to study the Ascended Master tradition, of course, one of the major tenets is learning how to do meditation. And through meditation, of course, then you can not only open up the chakra system, but also open up your consciousness to new levels of seeing and hearing information. And through that process, I also read many of the biographies of the master teachers, which really display their overall archetypes of consciousness. But they were very beautiful stories about love, about loss, about courage, victory, all of these amazing stories that really inspired me. And that was in the mid-'80s when that happened, and I was really more or less in my studying phase of their tradition.
So is this something like out of body? I mean, do you actually leave the body
Well, no. Trance technique is very, very different. Of course, there are some trance channelers who will leave their body. Like Jay-Z Knight, I think, is one of the famous channelers who actually will step aside and the deity, Ramtha, will actually use their body. But that is not at all the technique that I used at all. I was very good at meditation, and it would seem, I was at a meditation class, and the meditation leader said, well, please tell me, what your experiences are when you're in meditation. I said, well, there's always spiritual teachers there whenever I'm meditating. And I didn't know, Michael, that was abnormal. And so I could carry out, in my own telepathic response with these teachers, my own educational process. I would ask them things about past lives. They would show me past lives. And also help me with different spiritual techniques just to help me to spiritually grow and evolve. And I remember when I shared that with her, she says, oh my gosh, well, you must be a channel. And at that time, I didn't even know what a channel was. But a good friend was attending the class too, and I had shared with him also a dream that I had had in the 80s, which was a very profound dream. And in that dream, 4 beings in white robes unrolled a map of the United States. But it wasn't your average, everyday looking map. It was a map with massive changes on the coastlines. Obviously, it was earth changes. Mm-hmm. And also, along with the earth changes on the map, there exuded this very high spiritual energy. And that was a very profound experience for me to see this map. So I'd shared that with him, that I had had this dream. And he was a student of Edgar Cayce, and he said, Lori, with your susceptibility to easily go into trance, do you think there's a chance that you could ask the master teachers or the spiritual teachers to show you the map again, and we could get some of the details of that map? And so that's exactly what we did. We agreed to meet in the early morning hours, and we had a little handheld tape recorder, and I went into a meditative state. And in that meditative state, I stayed totally in my body. And when the teachers would appear, then I would say, well, they're here. And then we would begin this process of asking them questions, me kind of going back and forth, almost like talking on the telephone would be the best way to describe it. But as the process ensued for me, and I was able to develop my ability to transmit information, it became much more seamless.
And now this is an area that I'm really interested in. So what type of events are we talking about here? How much can you rely on the information, obviously? Let's start here. There's always going to be those groups out there that feel like any kind of channeling is evil. Now, I don't feel that way. I don't believe that. I think it's, these are gifts to be able to do these things. But how do you know? How can you be sure the information you're getting is...
Well, in A Teacher Appears, this book describes totally my whole process of how I began to channel, actually how I integrated my process. And in one of the chapters, I think it's about midway, I thought, well, what if this isn't of the light? And so I began to question the master teachers myself telepathically and saying, I want you to show me your light. And so readers can read those sections. And when I would do that, then they would, of course, show me their white, effulgent light. And so, of course, I proceeded without fear on that issue alone.
I see. Okay, good enough for me. So now, what causes our coastlines to be changed so drastically?
Well, the I'm America map is really a fascinating prophecy. And of course, prophecy is something that is always given to us ahead of time so that we can make positive changes now to possibly lessen or ameliorate their probability altogether. But it was a very drastic message. And the I'm America map itself shows major cities like Seattle and Los Angeles, Houston, Miami, New York, all underwater. And it wasn't so much that it was about the big one hitting California. What they did is that they described a series of events that they said could possibly happen. But again, they always say engendered, in your consciousness, in the choices that you make, is the ability to change this for the greater good. But they always would point out to us that we should look always in the series of events that they prophesied, reference points. And in the teacher appears, they were very clear about this. And what a reference point is that it's a position in the landscape of the now, or the ever-present now, where one can evaluate away probabilities. And so they say, place your reference points so you can initiate comparison between these actual events, prophesied events, and then again the possibility of the time. They did say, look for these events before the great purification or the great changes would happen, and they said to first look at how the United States economy is, because they felt that there would be some sort of an overall, not crash of the economy, but a total weakening of the U.S. economy that then would later on affect the entire world. The second thing that they said to look for is overall global warming. And they said that excess water in the ecosystem would cause a lot of problems with the spinning of the Earth. And that the spinning of the Earth and that excess water could cause activation of tectonic plates, and we'd end up getting worldwide earthquakes.
And of course, that's
last
happening.
but not least, then they talked about a possible meteor that was coming to the Earth, and that its impact would also cause further activation of tectonic plates.
Now, did they say that it's possible this stuff happens, or because I mean, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is actually happening now as we speak.
Well, exactly, which is why I decided that I wanted to publish a Teacher Appears. It was a lot of ancillary material that accompanied the I'm America map, and in our eagerness 20 years ago to publish the Earth Changes material and then all the subsequent Earth Changes information that, came along with it, it kind of went by the wayside. Because we just felt like, well, this isn't as important to get out. But now I see that events are accelerating. We have seen several of these reference points, if you will, start to trigger off. And I just think it's very important to share all the information that is there. And the Teacher Appears is the first of a trilogy of that kind of beginning information to help people to spiritually grow and evolve and to deal with these times of changes.
I see, and I've got a lot more questions also, but have you been following? I just caught wind of it before I came on the air of this tsunami or giant tidal wave that hit China.
No, I didn't. I did try to get onto Google News right before the interview, but I hadn't seen that. What has happened?
Well, that's why I was asking you. I'm not sure. I got some friends in the chat who are saying China is pretty much going through some bad stuff right now. So I don't know. Maybe it's something we could check out on the break, I guess. But
absolutely. Well, of course, we're living in a time where a lot of massive changes are possible. I think the biggest change that we're facing right now, of course, is global warming, with 95% of all of our icebergs melting. That's very apparent what is happening. Of course, we all know that we've had these massive changes in our economy, and things are kind of held together, with threads. So we are living and entering, I think, into the time of change. Now, it's interesting because when they talk about the time of change, that could be a time that could be as short as 20 years or as long as 2,000 years. So it's almost like an epic, something that we're going to enter into, just a time of geophysical instability. And generation upon generation of people will be born into the time of change. And I don't really feel that we are there just yet, but I do think it's upon us.
There are a lot of changes. I mean, earthquakes are up, I don't know if it was 7,000%, I think somebody had told me yesterday. And then the storms, I mean, here in South Carolina, we've gotten rain continuously, all but maybe a few days for the last 3 months. So the weather's changing. Then we're hearing people worry about shark attacks. Well, now I find that there's these squids that are migrating because of the temperature changes in the water. I mean, People think about
yeah, because the thermohaline, which is, regulates by the salinity of the ocean water, that's also something we need to have major concern about, because as these freshwater glaciers and icebergs melt, then we are actually altering that whole ocean conveyor belt. And that is why the master teachers in Freedom Star, which is the world map for changes that we produced after the I'm America United States map, they actually talked about how some of Europe would plunge into a mini ice age during the time of great change.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it, and obviously we've got a lot of changes happening here now. Some well, I guess a lot of people are saying that it's being caused by a celestial body out in space. Now, were you told anything about any kind of event like that?
Well, in subsequent work, they shared, of course, a lot about the galactic center, or the great central sun, and the energy that emits from that. And that is it's a non-visible non-quasar type of light that actually helps us to evolve and grow. And it regulates the epochs of time in classic Puranic Hindu timekeeping systems. But as they would explain it much more simply, is that it is actually helping to start or ensue a golden age upon the earth. And I know it's hard to believe that we actually are in a golden age, but it's a tiny one. We are actually in what is known as Kali Yuga, which is more of a downward trend, but we get this little reprieve of 10,000 years that started in 1899. And so the galactic light is growing. And I think this is why we do have some technology that's being given to us right now that is freeing us. But overall, the quality of life for some people, it really is not there yet.
And
but they do claim that when we reach the apex of that, which would be around 3,399, we'll have a full force of that galactic light.
And you said that we're being given the technology. Who's giving it to us?
Excuse me, what was that again, Michael?
I say you said that we're being given the technology, and I asked who's actually given us.
We're being given this from within, because of this light. What it does is it stimulates our DNA, and it does several things in doing so. What it does is that it increases our lifespan, so we live for much, much longer. The other thing is that it helps our brain function, and so we are able to retain information. Therefore, we have a better memory function and a better intelligence function. Our intelligence is much, much better, and we're just more able to cognize and engage in critical thinking. And also, it helps us to have more reverence for spiritual information. That is, our ability to develop empathy and compassion for the human condition.
Yeah, and that's something that we're definitely lacking. And I've been telling people right along, we need to come together. No matter what you think the end game is, we all need to come together. And the New World Order, these forces in power, they like to divide and conquer. And
well, it's almost as if this competition that we've all engaged in is actually very anti for the whole human experience. And of course, the master teachers, they say that as we enter into these new times, that we will really understand how scientifically important the law of love is, and we will enter into an age of cooperation, where we will actually learn oneness with the earth and also oneness with one another.
You know what I wonder, though, is how come every time we need to learn a lesson, we have to get destroyed?
It just seems that is the nature of being a human. And the good thing about crisis, though, is that it's often very unifying. And from that unification, we're able to always evolve things to a new level.
Absolutely.
And so even though we may go through these times of horrific and catastrophic change, it is also designed to help us evolve and to spiritually grow and to become more self-realized.
I see. Now, why do you suppose they came to you and told you this? Why you, and as have they been telling others?
Well, I ask that question a lot, especially in A Teacher Appears. I just had a very difficult time integrating the information. A Teacher Appears is actually two stories in one. It is my story of coming out of this very conventional, ordinary way of thinking and being exposed to a whole new way of thinking, which are these little teachings from the spiritual teachers, where they talk about transcendence, so they talk about unity, they talk about the age of cooperation, alongside our great need to change. And then also introducing how we can actually use meditation, visualization, and different spiritual techniques to raise our energy and actually come to understand the fourth and fifth dimensions, which are their dimensions of experience. But of course, it took me a while to integrate. And in fact, I ended up reading the work 3 different times in the book just because I had so much difficulty integrating the material.
I see. Yeah, it had to be difficult, explaining all of this. And I don't know, it's hard to say where we're headed. All I can say, I don't know what all the causes are, but we've got sinkholes as well. What's your thoughts on all these sinkholes that are happening?
Well, I don't know a lot about them, but I do know with the global warming, we possibly could have changes in just how water is actually functioning underneath the earth with aquifers, and also, there's actually rivers that run underground. So it's very possible that the global warming is causing that. You have all of those northern lands that are under permafrost, and they're thawing. So there are going to be just so many changes, even just from this one event of climate change and global warming. And I don't even think that our science can even wrap their head around what it is really going to mean to us in the long term. Because I know when it began, they were making predictions that we may not see the results from this, in the next 1,000 years. It would be something that many generations down the line would suffer through. But now, the way that they're talking about, they say in 20 years, we will have ramifications from this, primarily in climate change. That's why we're getting these huge superstorms. The other thing that I found that's very interesting is how climate change is going to have such a huge effect on food production. And the USDA, I don't know if people understand this or not, just recently had to rescribe all their agricultural districts just so they could reformat how we're farming and cropping in the United States so that it could fit the new models with the new changes that we have.
Yeah, and I don't have a whole lot of faith in the science we're being given in mainstream anyways, because they're still blaming SUVs. And, these changes are happening not just on our planet, but other planets in our solar system. So, you got to wonder what the actual cause is of all this. I mean, I know our sun controls a lot.
I think it's just a tragedy that we're politicizing it when we really have a crisis going on. And whatever's causing it, we do have a problem. There's a great documentary that came out in 2009 called Chasing Knives by James Baylog. He was a photographer for National Geographic, and he had noticed just by a fluke, he did not believe in global warming at all. And he began to take photographs of icebergs and glaciers, and then would go back to the same location. And several months later, noticed that they were receding. So he raised money, and he set up timed cameras, and ended up producing this amazing documentary, Chasing Ice. And he says that basically that ice is the canary in the coal mine. It basically can give you and show you what is happening to the whole world ecosystem. And of course, I was interested because this matches many of the prophecies that are in A Teacher Appears. So it's very fascinating to understand what is happening, but I do not think that our science is at the point where it can properly interpret that for us and tell us exactly what is going to happen.
Right, and I think that even the ones who can, some of the ones who really go outside the box, they're not allowed to tell
No,
us.
they're not.
Yeah.
They're not, and I honestly don't think that we can even rely on, conventional news sources. I began to notice that, at least 5 or 6 years ago, that just didn't seem that things were actually being conveyed to us or reported to us, just how drastic these changes are. And so that's when I began to keep an Earth Changes blog, and I just began to keep as many news stories as I possibly could find from revered sources and good sources of just what we're undergoing right now in terms of these superstorms and massive hurricanes, terrible snowstorms, just everything that is happening right now.
Yeah, it is absolutely incredible. I don't remember a time in my life when I've seen so much going on. I mean, we're literally watching our planet change before our eyes. And, never before, I don't believe in human history has anybody been able to actually see all these changes in their lifetime.
Well, and they say that if we continue with the global warming and climate change, the trajectory of where we're going right now, they say in 200 years, 1/2 of all the species of animals that are present right now on the Earth will be extinct.
Oh, I forget what the numbers are now, but I think it's in the thousands, might be the hundreds, I don't want to exaggerate here, of species that, become extinct every day on this planet. And it's scary. It's a lot going on. I mean, we've got the mass fish deaths. There's dolphins that come out of the ocean. They look like they've been put in microwave ovens. And, so...
I know.
Yeah. So
that was actually one of the prophecies that one of the masters, Kuthumi, talked about in A Teacher Appears. He talked about how the herds of elk and deer would be completely diminished, that even our domestic horses and cattle would also be threatened. And we asked why, and he went on to say that it was just really simple. It was related to the amount of food that they would have available to use.
Right, and and when people talk about man-made climate change, it kind of takes me over to things like HARP, and we've seen documentation that proves that the government, military, has tampered in weather modification, and some speculate that they're doing it, to try to save humanity. And I say, well, if that's the case, why not tell us? So, there's a lot of covert weather modification that goes on as well. And some even speculate that they can cause earthquakes. Now, I don't know about that, although I do know that with certain frequency, you can do anything. I've seen people boil water with just frequency. So,
well, I've heard it both ways, that the covert changes to our weather. One is that they're trying to stop this onslaught of global warming. That's one theory I've heard. The other is that they're working to remove large population groups.
Oh, they are. Yeah, it's depopulation. Brings you to the Georgia Guidestones. They want to knock 3/4 of the population off this planet. And we know that these, I call them evil minions, who run these governments. They've got their safe havens. They've got their underground bunkers, underground cities. It's been exposed. They actually have farms underneath, under the ground. And my best guess is that's probably the worst place to be, because they're probably going to get stuck there and buried there. So,
well, I don't think that we totally and can clearly comprehend what this will be like once this breakdown starts. One other thing that I wanted to mention, the drastic changes off to the side. Another thing that the spiritual teachers talked about that was very uplifting, they talked about safe havens or protected areas, places where we could go to actually enjoy the higher spiritual energies that are now coming to the earth, and we could actually raise ourselves in vibration and pursue our own ascension or liberation process. And as they described these areas, Michael, they said that these Golden City areas not only would be safe to live during the times of changes, but they would also be places where our spiritual practice, that is our prayer, our meditation, anything that we do to help the earth during this climate testing and climate changes would be amplified in a way to help the Earth and its inhabitants to grow in energy and vibration. And so there are 5 areas in the United States altogether.
That are safe?
Well, that they consider to be safe areas primarily for interaction with spiritual energy. Now, we consider them somewhat safe from Earth changes as well, although we're not certain altogether if that's true or not. But there's no doubt in my mind that these areas are, when you look at them and the areas that they enjoy, they are areas that are very pristine. That is, they're not very populated. So it makes me just think perhaps they know more about the future, and because of that, they want us to know these are these areas where we can actually assist you and guide you in coming to a new dimension of spiritual growth and evolution.
Obviously, I think people are gonna, if they buy into it, and ocean levels have been rising. I've just seen a report here where the islands off the Carolinas, they said within the next 10 years won't be there anymore. The water is starting to overcome them. And we see large areas in Alaska where the ice is melting, and they're losing their land, I guess you could say. It's flooding. So no doubt that it's rising. So people would obviously want to get away from the coast, and I think good advice also would be to get out of cities.
Yes, I think so too. I wanted to describe for the listeners the 5 areas just so they would know. They're known as the Golden Cities, and
Absolutely.
We actually have United States Golden City now if they want to get more information about that. But the first one is in Arizona and New Mexico, and these are really large, so they're large areas, and they're well over 200 miles across. Then there's another one that's in Illinois and Indiana, and I think you might be near one. There's one in Georgia and South Carolina. There is another one in the Pacific Northwest in Montana and Idaho, and then the final one is in Colorado.
I see. Well, tell me about the one in my area first.
We've learned a lot more about them and how they work. They're sort of based on a sacred geometry, if you will, is maybe the best way to understand them. They have 4 doorways, and each of the doorways carries a different type of energy. It really is a lot like the classic 4 directions in Native American teaching. So they have the north door, the south door, the east door, and the west door. In the center is the star, which has a 40-mile radius, and that is where the energies are the strongest. And I know that center is in Augusta, Georgia, the one that's in Georgia and South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times with these Golden City vortices, they're channeling a lot of the energies of the Earth itself. So there might be like a lot of beautiful rivers, or a huge lake, or a tectonic fault line of some sort. Sometimes there's a large canyon or a fissure. Like I think that the Grand Canyon probably drives a lot of the energy of the Golden City that I live in here in Arizona and New Mexico. I know that Hell's Canyon probably drives the energies of the one up in Idaho and Montana. And of course the New Madrid Fault probably drives the energies of the one in Illinois and Indiana.
Yeah, speaking of faults, I've been worrying about here. Not worrying, I wouldn't say worrying, but I've been giving it a lot of thought. And that is the, between Columbia, South Carolina, and Charleston, there's quite a big fault that I guess has not gone off since the late 1800s, from what I understand.
What is the name of that fault line, Michael?
Oh, you got me.
That's interesting, because that might be driving the energies of that vortex in your area.
That very well could be. I'm not sure. Do you know, Honey? The fault line here? I moved here in 2008, so I'm going to play dumb on that one. But I know that there's a pretty big one. And the last time it went off was the late 1800s, and they said it's well overdue. And with all the rain we've been getting, I'm guessing, a good lubricant. So, At some point, it's got to give.
Absolutely. Well, again, as I've said before, once we enter into the time of change, it could go very quick, or it could take a long time. We could be in geophysical change for thousands of years. It is important, though, to understand that alongside these drastic changes that these spiritual teachers have informed us about, is that they also say that within us is the gentle revolution which can redirect the course of such events. So spiritual practice, meditation, and work that we can do for others through empathy and compassion actually raises all in vibration, and perhaps through that change in our heart and change in our choices will actually change some of these prophesied events on the earth.
And that would be a good thing. So now, what would you suggest as far as people, some people don't take this stuff very serious and others do, and for the ones who do, what would you suggest for those who maybe can't just pick up and move and do things like that? Maybe preparedness a little.
Well, preparedness, I think, is very important. Of course, as I just mentioned, spiritual preparedness is always the best, because if you're grounded and you're in your heart, you will be able to deal with almost anything that will happen in the tumultuous time of change. But I didn't used to advocate storing food, but now I think you should have some sort of a program in place. Not something that, that you're just dusting off, but get into some sort of food storage program that you can actually rotate as part of your everyday diet. Store grains, store legumes. There's many other, types of dehydrated foods that you can store. And I think ideally you should have at least 2 years in place. Some people advocate having a lot more, having 7 years in place. The master teachers also talked about always having precious metals and gemstones, that when our economy falters, that we may not be able to trade with others, and so that's a way that we can still have a tradable resource, is what they call it, in place, to own your land free and clear. I also, in the teacher peers, they talked about heirloom seeds and how seeds themselves will become a commodity that will be traded during the times of change. Now, of course, with weather patterns being unpredictable, we just don't know really what is going to happen. But those are just some small things we can do. And I also think it's important, if you can, to grow a small garden. Maybe not for your primary food source, but also just so you can begin to create a oneness with the earth and to reconnect with the earth, because that is a very healing aspect of all of this. It returns us to a more organic and sustainable way of living, and also helps us to enjoy in our own oneness with the earth.
New Madrid, that's what it's called.
Oh, it's part of the New Madrid fault?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's what it is. I've been trying to pull it up here because it just slipped my mind. I started. It was going to bother me, so I had to find out. But yeah, that's what it is.
That's a dangerous fault line. It's really fascinating, because when we were working on all of the information in the teacher peers, at that time, the Cascadia fault line had not even been discovered. And of course, there's massive changes that are prophesied to happen in the Pacific Northwest at the time that's where we were living. And so I think now that they say it's just not a matter of will it happen, it's just a matter of when will it happen. And the tragedy of that whole area, especially Seattle down to Tacoma, is that none of that has really been built for massive earthquakes.
Yeah, I don't think they can prepare for the size earthquakes that I think we'll be getting. I've had guests on for the last 6 years who have told me that the earthquakes were going to pick up. They told me about all this stuff. And, we used to think they were kind of out there. And everything that they've said has certainly been coming to play. So, the earth is definitely going through changes. There's no denying it. And that's why I tell people all the time, no matter what you think the cause is, the fact is you cannot deny that we are going through these changes, and people should prepare the best that they can. Me, I'm letting the old Holy Spirit guide me. If it's time for me to get out of my area, then I would suggest, or I would expect rather, that I will get that sign to do so.
Well,
Hopefully,
that's what I rely on as
yeah.
well. And in fact, people will say, "Well, should we move?" And I'll always say, "Well, you need to check within and go within. And safety is always a matter of heart. So if you get the guidance to move, then of course, then you should probably follow that." But interestingly, there have been many people I've encountered in the 20-some years of sharing this information who will get information to stay. And a lot of times that is because for their soul's journey, that's where they must be at that time. And there are people that they need to touch or service that they need to give and to be part of. And so it's always fascinating to me because the time of change to me is not about, fear. It's really more about acceptance and surrender to a whole natural process.
Yeah, and going back to the elite leaders again, they obviously are aware that something is coming. I don't think they built all these underground bunkers and these seed storage facilities that they have and all this other stuff that they've done, not to mention the billions of ammunition they've bought. I mean, so obviously they're prepared for something. So I always say, watch the animals in the woods. When you see them running, you know something's about to happen. So same thing goes in Washington.
They do tell us ahead of time, don't they?
Yeah. Same thing goes with Washington. Keep your eye on them. You see them scatting out of the woods, then you know something's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that the master teachers have shared with us through the years is what I call sort of their divine intervention, how they see the changes and how we can move along with the time of change and actually realize a better time on this earth. And of course, the golden cities that I described, I think, are part of that. And they come out of, in Ascended Master's spiritual teaching tradition, they come out of the Western Shambhala tradition. I don't know if you've ever heard of Shambhala or not, but it's like a higher vibrational frequency city, a ethereal city, and so they see the golden city somewhat carrying those really beautiful ethereal force and fifth dimensional energies. They claim that overall on Earth that we will enter into unity consciousness or a Christ consciousness, and that will also help us to grow and evolve to higher levels of compassion and empathy. But the one thing I thought was really fascinating, and maybe you've heard about this too, Michael, but they talked about the birth of new highly evolved souls on Earth. And these are known as the new children. And they actually are souls that are incarnating. They have never been on the Earth before, and they're coming from other solar systems.
Are these
very high vibrations?
Are these star children?
Well, sometimes they're called star children. Sometimes they're called indigo children. They're called blue children. They're called the new children. They're called a lot of different things. I just call them the new children, that they're coming and they have a whole different way that they relate to life itself. And primarily, the way that they are different is that they're very free and they do not like restraint of any type. And so they have a different way that they interact, and I think that they're going to carry and weight our culture and our civilization in a totally different direction.
I see.
And I think that they'll play a role in creating a more enlightened culture on Earth in the new time.
All right, let's talk a little more about that after this next long-time listeners and supporters of this show. But they're personal friends of mine, and I wish them many, many, many more. So congratulations to you both. My guest, Lori Toye. And Lori, tell people where they could get the book and give out any website information. And then after you do that, there's some listeners who might have just tuned in. And this is all based off your personal experience, and we'll get into that briefly next. But, yeah, go ahead. Where can I get it?
Yes, I wanted to mention this before we got into more prophecies. people who are listening can go to I'mAmerica.com or to LoriToye.org, and that's LORITOYE.org, and actually download a free audio version of A Teacher Appears. And we really had a great time creating this audiobook. We cast 12 different voice actors for the roles of the 14 different spiritual teachers that share prophecy and spiritual teachings in A Teacher Appears, and I think that they will really enjoy it.
Okay, great. And so now some have asked about credentials. This isn't so much a credential thing as it is a personal experience, correct?
It's more of a personal experience. A Teacher Appears is all about how I opened up to and surrendered to the spiritual teachers and their request to share this information. And then also it's the backstory of how I actually helped them to create the I'm America map.
Okay, and I do have it's kind of a poor picture, but I do have a picture of it on the main page. I've got to get that worked out. For some reason, some of these pictures, the slider I have isn't capturing the entire picture, but people can go.
Do you want me to go over the coastlines with you for your listeners?
Yes, please do.
Okay. There is a large bay that is in the Pacific Northwest, and of course that leaves Seattle underwater. Spokane, Washington is part of the new coastline, so is Lewiston, Idaho. Now this is sort of interesting, but Mount Shasta in California remains, and it becomes almost like a peninsula of land. And of course, then the coastline moves all along southern Idaho, and Salt Lake City is underwater, and the seaport goes all the way into Denver, Colorado.
Wow.
And so ocean waters are covering all of Nevada, most of Utah. And then the next major point on the coastline is down to Phoenix, Arizona. So Los Angeles and San Francisco are underwater. There is a large island that is, they call it Gibraltar Island, which is part of the Yosemite mountain formation in California. That remains. Interestingly enough, San Diego, California also is above water after the Great Changes. They talked about the flooding of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers and its tributaries, and they said that the Mississippi River would flood and widen so much that it would almost break the United States in half. And so a large bay forms over Louisiana and a lot of Texas, and Houston is underwater, and Dallas, Texas is now part of the new coastline. Of course, New Orleans is underwater. In the northeast, they talked about, remember we talked about the thermohaline and perhaps the changes in the climate. They said that would get very icy and cold, and that they would have really drastic and very cold winters during the time of Great Change, that there would be a lot of high winds that would hit the East Coast. And then also they talked about how the southern tip of Florida would actually sink and go underwater. Since that time, first, printing the I'm America map, we went on to share prophecies for the entire world, which are in the Freedom Star World Map. But then we updated in 1996, 1997, the I'm America map. And at that time, the spiritual teachers presented what is known as the 6-map scenario, and it shows how the changes could occur from one map to the 6th map, the I'm America map being the 6th map. But they then explained two very interesting spiritual concepts. One, how human consciousness is related to these types of changes and how drastic they are, and also the idea of simultaneous realities, that there are these different realities that could be existing, and we are actually almost leaping between different realities, as you can understand, and when you see the different maps and how the changes occur. Map number 1 is probably the lesser of all of them. Map number 5 is actually very extreme. So it really does depict different scenarios and just how we actually can work with consciousness to shift and to change these type of horrific prophecies.
I see. So then it could be different timelines, because I've had others tell me that, well, it depends what timeline we're on. And
exactly. I think there are different timelines, especially with these changes, and I think especially with this type of information that we get, that channels, psychics, anyone who's got a telepathic rapport, it comes from the fourth dimension. Some of it does also come from fifth dimension. So it's a timeless type of information. That's why when you ask for date lines and for dates and timeline and that kind of stuff on this type of information, it's rarely, if ever, accurate. So it allows us then to see just how different realities can kind of be shifting between these different types of scenarios. It is really a fascinating study.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. And now, can we change this? I mean, I know you kind of talked about it a little bit before, but I mean, can we change the timeline we're on? Are we able to do that?
I think we can. And I think that that's what the great spiritual teachers, the great avatars, the great adepts that have come to this earth, they actually knew that we could change realities. And so that's why they would often make these very simple statements, but very profound statements that we are all one, or everything is love. Because these are the qualities that actually can change these types of events. Saint Germain, who is my major teacher, throughout A Teacher Appears, says that this is not an age of competition, that we are in an age of cooperation. And the more that we move into the age of cooperation, we will have more harmony with nature. And when we have more harmony with nature, we won't have these drastic changes.
Now, tell me a little bit about past lives, because you did mention that in the early going, and I get so fascinated by these earth changes and these messages, and there's been so many who have talked about this kind of thing, and it's all pretty similar. So, I mean, if we're to believe that everybody is really getting this information, then it's got to be right, because everyone's coming up with the same type of catastrophes, especially when it comes to the coastline.
Well, I think many of us have probably lived on Earth in another time where we went through similar changes. And one theory that I have, and that actually is also advocated in Hinduism and Buddhism to some extent, is that there is sort of a swinging door of souls here on the Earth. And at times there'll be a group that will come here and they evolve and they grow and they get ready to leave. And as they get ready to leave, then another new group comes in. And of course, who knows how many lifetimes that they've had here on Earth, growing and learning and getting to the point where they leave. But it does seem like that Earth changes, or massive changes to the Earth itself globally, seem to accompany a group of souls leaving and a new group of souls coming in. And I did quite a bit of research on this in my book, Divine Destiny, where the master teachers actually gave a map of the Earth the way that it looked before it does now. And they began to explain what the Earth was like then, and then what were the great changes that brought it to its state where it is now. And they talked about the ancient lands of Amaru, the ancient lands of Lemuria, and the ancient lands of Atlantis.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, and we know that this type of event has happened in the past, because when we get information of scalings of the bottom of the ocean floor, there's actual cities that are on the floor of the ocean, right in between Cuba and Florida, for instance. There's pyramids, and looks like golden sidewalks or something they've got under there, but it's like a little city.
Yes, and that's one of the areas that at one time was Atlantis. Now Atlantis, as I understand it, and my research in Divine Destiny, actually had three sort of, if you will, eras of history. And the final great sinking of Atlantis happened around 9,800 BC, around in there. Don't quote me, because I don't have my notes in front of me on that, but around that time period. But it went through many different levels of different catastrophes. Hence, they went through changes many, many times in their civilization. So I would suspect that this is kind of what is upon us now, that as we enter into this time of change, that it will be pretty long period where we will see a lot of geophysical change.
Do you think there comes a time, and maybe these teachers told you about a time where we'll all, I mean, I believe we're all spiritually connected, and will there be a time when we evolve to a point where we don't have to go through these catastrophic lessons, if you will?
I think so. I don't know if that will be here. I think we evolve and grow, and some of us stay here in the higher dimensions and help those, who are in third dimension to evolve and spiritually grow. I think that we, as a soul, we are immortal and we move on. And I think we go to different solar systems and lokas, L-O-K-A-S, that's a Hindu idea of a dimension of experience, and they all have different vibration and energy that is best suited for our vibration and energy where we're at.
Now, what about the UFO phenomena? Did you get any information on that? Now, I know that just talking with you, that you believe that we're not alone.
No, we're not alone, and the master teachers have kind of stayed away from that topic. They seem like they've given me information about what's coming up, but every now and then we'll question them about UFOs and just exactly what you just asked. One thing that is very fascinating about Mount Shasta, and this was in my early days of sharing the American map, is it's sort of a peninsula of land. Well, have you heard of the Billy Meyer material?
Yes, I have.
Well, I met an individual at a Whole Life Expo in the early 90s, and he looked at the American map, and he said, that this is really interesting because this totally matches mappa changes that Sannyasi had given to Billy Meyer. And the main thing that they were using, they were time travelers, they were using the peninsula of land out to Mount Shasta to navigate with when they would come into the earth field.
I see. Okay, and the Star Children now, we left off going into the break talking about these, different names, but I know them as Star Children. Are they just sitting, waiting for their time to come? I mean, how does all that work?
Well, my sense on it, Michael, is that some of them are being born now because right now the Earth needs them. We need them to help us raise energy and vibration. They say that many new children will be born into Europe, and they're being born right now. Some of them are actually in their 20s and early 30s. And you can see that what is happening there for human rights is huge. And I think that they are playing a huge role in creating that movement over there. They also prophesied that Mother Mary would be the sponsor or the sort of the higher energy that is allowing these children to be born at this time, and that many of these souls would be born into South America. There would also be a scattering of these souls also born in the United States and some into Canada, but that in sort of the apex of the golden age, that most of them would be in South America. And it's interesting because in the world map, it shows that South America retains a lot of land mass, and so does Africa. And we asked them, well, why do those two areas retain so much land mass and the United States loses a lot, Europe is practically gone? And they said it's because we're going to actually change our whole orientation and move more into a feminine way of living and thinking. And of course, those are more in the southern hemisphere, and so that is where more of the culture and the society will come from in the new time.
I see. And somebody's asking if you receive these spiritual messages. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. He asks if you receive it through the air. I think what he means is,
telepathically?
Yeah. Is that how this?
Yes, I think that's the best way to describe it. It is also, there's different levels of trance, of course, and there's different methods of channeling. I developed my ability. I'm a clairaudient trance channel. That is, I can take my meditation technique to a level where I can actually receive the information, voice received, and then we tape record that, and then from the tape recording of that, we create a transcript, and then from the transcript, then we go through a whole editing process, and that's how I produce my book.
Okay.
It's a long process, and we're very careful with it that we keep the information in its highest clarity and purity.
Now, did they want you to get this information out? Was that one of their sole purposes for you to tell people?
I believe it was. Of course, just an FYI, a master teacher will never, ever tell you what to do.
Right.
They won't say do this or do that. That's not how they work at all. Instead, if you have a problem and you go to them and say, well, what do you think about this? They're very much like an elder brother or sister, and they'll just put their arm around you and basically say, if I were you, this is what I would do. And then they'll quote the universal laws and educate you in laws of cause and effect, hermetic law, whatever is applicable for the problem. And with this, it was apparent that we were facing such catastrophe and possible cataclysm that we felt we really had a duty to future generations to share this information. And so we asked one of the master teachers just how should we, posture this type of material, and he said, send this message to the earth with love. And so we've always taken this approach, a much more softer approach with our material, but this isn't all carved in stone. That instead it's up to us and the choices that we make every day that will change the world that we live in.
Now, do these teachers do they work for God Himself? Is that where?
Well, the way that we see it is that everything is God,
right? And
everything is interconnected through this universal source of creation, and we are also part of that as co-creators. That within us is an innate divinity that is waiting to be realized. And so we actually begin a process of self-realization or self-actualization, which they would describe as the ascension process, or in Hinduism it's known as the liberation process.
Okay. All right. And we've got to take another break here. This one's a short one, though. We'll take this break and we'll come back. And any area that you'd like to go that we might not have touched on yet, I'd be more than happy to do that. And people are welcome to call in at 803-369-3608. This is Late Night in the Midlands. My guest is Lori Toye, and we've got her linked up over on the website. So feel free to go ahead and click that link as well. King has been sharing it in the chat room too, and you can go check it out and see how you can. Lori Toye, and we do have her linked up over on the website, several places actually. You can get her linked down at the bottom of the main page, or you can get it right on the picture slider that we have on the main page. So all you got to do is click her picture and it'll bring up the bio, and the website link is right there. And I encourage you all to check it out. I have the book here, and I'll tell you, it's a fascinating read. And, I'm very interested, Lori, in this whole spiritual side of things. I've had experiences of my own, both with the good and the bad. And what is it? I mean, why do we come back? What's the purpose of coming back? Is it that, I kind of speculate that maybe we don't complete what we're supposed to, or we haven't learned that lesson, and we have to come back? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it's so much that we have quote-unquote lessons, but I think we come back to have experiences. Because experiences really is where all of our spiritual growth comes from. And we are learning how to move beyond belief and into experience. Beliefs are powerful things, and I think beliefs play a great role in our co-creation ability. But experience is the most important thing always.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that. I've had psychics who have told me that we choose to be here at this time. Is that what you get?
I think so. I heard a great saying one time about this time of change that we're in. They say that during any time of great change, that it is an honor to be alive. That there are many souls that are clamoring to come in here right now at this time, because there's so much negative karma that we can release through going through this, and so much positive dharma or purpose or karma that we can gain also through the process of being here during this time of planetary cleansing.
Yeah, that's why I tell people as much as I can to turn off the fake news. You know, you watch that TV news. How many great stories, good stories, stories of hope do you see on the mainstream media? None, really.
It's so rare, and yet that is what we as humans, we so deeply resonate to and need.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and we try to. Well, we tell people what's going on because that's what we're here for. That's what we're supposed to do. At the same time, we try to throw in solutions. Like we've recently come across a gentleman by the name of Anthony. Last name always slips me, but he's a friend of a friend. And he's been fighting, you know, these evil banks have been trying to force people out of their homes. Well, this guy's located in Hawaii, and he confronted the sheriff's department and the whole justice system, basically judges and all, and confronted them with common law, and he was able to put a stop to it. So there is ways where we could take back our sovereignty, where we can take back our own thinking. People need to think for themselves, and
and actually realize our own divinity.
Yeah,
which is the God source within us, and learn how to rely on that. It's almost as if today, I laughed over your last commercial about the two pills, the blue pill or the red pill, because it's almost as if that we are living in a matrix, and it's almost as if there's two worlds. There's one world of the corporatocracy where we're being lied to, where it's just a lot of nonsense that's always fed to us through news agencies. And then there's another world that we can live in that is beyond illusion, and that is where we are empowered with our own divine spark and know what is right for us and observe and practice our own truth.
Absolutely, and that's what we are doing. You know, this internet. I know there's a lot of criticism towards some of the stuff. Let's face it, there's a lot of disinfo that goes across it. But at the same time,
I'm sure there is.
Yeah, we have been able to connect. I remember growing up being told, well, the people in this country want you dead, da-da-da-da. You know, and now you could talk to people in these other countries, and you could see they're just like you. They want peace.
They do.
Yeah, it's the evil is driven.
They want spiritual experience, and I think that they want to relate to the goodness that really is in humanity.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
But we are becoming so polarized as well, which of course is reflected in our culture and our society, especially in our political scene. And I think that is also part of this two worlds that we're simultaneously experiencing. And I think that is probably our soul's challenge at this time, is to find who we are through that, and to firmly live and be who we are during these tumultuous times of changes.
Absolutely. Now, the question had come up earlier, are you psychic?
I am. It runs in my family, and didn't realize that until I kind of began to write about my experiences and share my experiences, and through that process have come in my own family. People come to me all the time and share their psychic experiences, and we actually think that it does run in the family, and some of the children now that are being born in subsequent generations are also exhibiting signs of being psychic.
I see. And to what degree? I guess there's different degrees. Depends on how well you've developed it. Now, what degree are you?
Well, I don't know if I could call it a degree, but there's a lot of different ways that it can work. Some people will be just all and out psychic, and they'll just get impressions, and they just know something's going to happen, and that does happen to me quite frequently. There's also, of course, you can have dreams, and dreams are very, they have different degrees and qualities, and I have a tendency to get precognitive dreams. So I pay attention to my dream space, because that will sort of guide and lead me to where I need to go. Another area of psychic development, of course, is the intuition, and that's where you can get like the strong gut feelings about certain things. And I think a lot of people are learning to develop that now. In my book, A Teacher Appears, there's a lot of meditation, visualization techniques that you can use to actually develop the intuition and to get greater clarity to tune into who your spirit guides may be, who can actually guide and direct your soul's evolution at this time.
I see. You know, I have a few different psychics who come on the show, and there's some who will say, you know, I don't get into the political stuff. They don't want to get into it. And then you'll have listeners who will say, well, if you're psychic, you should be able to pick up on that. But I guess you got to channel into those things, and some refuse to do it.
It doesn't really work like that either. I think it's one of those things that sometimes you'll just get a very strong hit, and you're getting it for a reason. And I think if you're getting a premonition or a psychic hit, there is a reason why you're getting it. Of course, there's sometimes you don't get the information, and there's also a reason why you don't get the information. So it seems like it's something that we just can't turn on and off at will. It does seem to have more of a randomness to it. But back in 1996, I began to study two classical forms of prediction. One of them, of course, is based on Taoism, which is Chinese classical feng shui. And I mean the classical, not what's out there in pop stuff. But it's very predictive in nature. And you can actually study landform and that type of thing, and it will tell you quite a bit about things that can happen to a certain person living in a certain sort of a time and place form of prediction. But the one that really appealed to me the most and that I resonate very deeply with is Jyotish, which is Hindu astrology or Vedic astrology. And that is a very reliable form of prediction. It can tell you quite a bit about what will happen in a person's life and also what's happening more in the world scene.
I see. Okay. Is there anything here that we haven't hit on that you'd like to hit on?
Well, if you have the time, what I have here about 20 prophecies that I thought would be kind of interesting to share. This is all updated work that I have put together, and I kind of organized it by region. And this is, I think, a good way, just by going through this, we can kind of look at those reference points and see if any of these make any sense as we traverse into this time of change.
We've still got another hour, so if you want.
Oh, terrific.
So please go ahead.
Well, the first area I wanted to talk about is California. And one thing that they talked about is that during global warming that we would see many forest fires in that region, especially in the Southwest. And of course, right now, we have a lot of forest fires all throughout the whole West United States.
Right.
So I think that's one of those that's obvious. They said that, of course, Mount Shasta would stay intact throughout all the global changes. And that they also said the series of quakes may occur in California, but the most horrific quakes are activated by global warming. And that is because it places pressure on tectonic plates. And they say first we may see the flooding of California. So look for floods in California.
Okay.
Another thing is that they said that tectonic shifts linked to California are also linked also with Washington and Oregon, and that we would see changes when we get into the most horrific changes, that we would see changes throughout the whole west coastline from British Columbia, Canada, all the way down to South America.
Wow.
Now this is kind of an interesting prophecy. In the Pacific Northwest, I guess it's not exactly Pacific Northwest, but Montana, but they talked about the Yellowstone caldera. And they said that the Yellowstone caldera is actually linked to the physical formation of a series of mountains that will form in the central part of the United States. Now, what is interesting is that about 15 years ago, the U.S. government was doing some research, and they were actually doing photography based on heat of the Earth, and they actually could see that they're underneath in the central part of the United States. They could see that there's some mountains that are actually beginning to form, and they call that study Deep Probe. And if you go on my website, I think it would be under Earth Changes or under Prophecies. In that area, you'll find the PDF that actually has the information of that government study.
Oh, that's very interesting. You know, and I believe the Bible actually covers something like that in Revelations. Maybe it is that mountains will rise and mountains will crumble, or something along those lines.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, they call this new chain of mountains the Cooperation Mountains, and they're prophesied to rise up in about the 200th year of the time of change, and then they actually, as a geological formation, they form all the way down through Mexico and then go through Central America as well.
Wow. Okay,
So,
and what else we got?
well, the Yellowstone caldera, this is interesting. They say that it's allegedly linked to the volcanic system of the Cascade Mountains. So they say to always watch Mount Baker, that Mount Baker will tell you the vulnerability and the susceptibility of the Yellowstone caldera erupting. And so we did ask them, will it erupt during the time of change? And they said, oh, unequivocally it will. So it will erupt sometime in the time of change. We just don't know when. But to watch Mount Baker, because that will kind of tell you what that volcanic system is actually doing.
Okay, interesting. And we have had a lot of volcanic activity happening around the globe. So,
yeah, all part of that ring of fire.
Yeah,
It's all been activated.
Mm-hmm.
They said that the new coastline would extend from the states of Idaho and into Utah, which is similar to the America map. And that this is sort of an interesting prophecy back down to the southwest. They said that in New Mexico that there's many underground caverns and that they're filled with natural gas and are very susceptible to explosion.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
Interesting prophecy. And I don't know if it's true or not, but I do know for a fact that in parts of Arizona, especially in the White Mountains, that David Hatcher Childress has written quite a bit about this, that there's a whole underground system that the Native Americans knew about. And Geronimo would enter in somewhere in the White Mountains and go into an underground cavern where he would follow an underground river and then come out in the Chiricahua Mountains, which are down into southern Arizona.
I see. Now, what did you say would explode? I'm sorry.
The underground caverns of New Mexico.
Okay.
And apparently, this is what I've heard. I don't know if it's true, but allegedly, the Native Americans have always known about the underground caverns, and they knew which caverns were filled with gas, poisonous gas, and which ones were safe for them to travel in. So they navigated kind of the underworld that way.
Well, you look at what's going on in Louisiana right now, too. There's a giant sinkhole that they say could explode. It's full with all kinds of gases and chemicals, from what I understand, and they've actually evacuated areas around it because it just keeps growing.
Is it natural gas or man-made chemical?
Hard to say, because the information on what it is exactly comes from the very people who'd rather we don't know about this. So
I see.
So it's really hard to say, but I know that there's been a lot of speculation about it exploding. And then you think about the BP oil spill. There's supposed to be a fracture down there, and we've been told that methane gas is building like a giant bubble in the ocean. Now, I haven't heard a whole lot about it as of late, but that was the last report I got, that there was this huge bubble forming, and if it exploded, what a catastrophe that would be.
Oh my gosh, yes. And you know, some of the prophecies for that area are really unusual. They talk about in the Texas coastline and all that, the new coastline, that because there'll be such a major change in the salinity of the water, there's how much salt is in the water to fresh water, that there'll be many new forms of life that will actually be discovered in that area in the new times. And when I talk about the new times, that's the time period that we enjoy after we go through the time of change.
New forms of life. I wonder if that could even mean these. I don't know if you've heard about them. The mermaids. Have you seen that documentary?
Yes, I have. That's really fascinating, and I think there are just so many species that exist on Earth that we're just not aware of.
I think so too, and I know so. People are divided on it. Half the people think it's bull. The other half think that there's something to it. I'm one of those who feel there's something to it, because you go to all the websites that are involved, and they've got the big Homeland Security slapped right on them. So they've taken these sites over. There's a lot of evidence that points, at least for me, that there's something to be said about this mermaid stuff.
Now, here's another thing about that same area of Texas, prophecy that's interesting. They say that also the salinity of the ocean waters will change all the weather patterns, not only in that area of Texas, but that will have a direct effect on the weather patterns in South America. Because not only do the changes change coastlines, but they change the way that the weather patterns are actually, how wind is distributing over the earth.
Yeah, and you've got, certain crops, plant life that, and even wildlife that is used to a certain climate. And once that starts changing, bad things happen.
Here's another interesting prophecy. They say that Houston and San Antonio will be covered by ocean waters, and Texas may see new coastlines up to 120 miles inland from the present-day coastline.
Wow! So
that's huge.
What big cities would be affected there?
Well, of course, Houston would be, Dallas would be on the new coastline. That's what I have in front of me, but everything in between there, of course, would be underwater. I don't know how deep that bay would be, but they wouldn't be habitable.
Right, and somebody made a good point here in the chat. He says if all those tunnels explode, that would take care of the elite hiding underground.
Well, never put all your eggs in one basket, huh?
Yeah, that's true.
This is interesting. Of course, we know this, but they talked about on the East Coast that the East Coast would be hit by many superstorms, and they said that superstorms will cause much death and destruction, but many of the souls that leave will later return to Earth when there will be a higher consciousness on Earth.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what when we talk about the Mayan calendar, they never said that it was going to be the end. That it basically, some say it was just the end of the calendar, but I think it was descripted to me that there was, a higher consciousness coming. And
absolutely, I see it, Michael, as the beginning of the beginning. I think that we're just in these very seminal, foundational states of this new time and a new way of thinking. And the thing is, it's interesting is alongside the growth of this higher consciousness are also these great changes. And it's almost like the two of them sort of exist side by side and make certain that we don't miss any opportunity to grow and to learn.
Right, absolutely.
Now, this is an interesting prophecy for the East Coast, New England and Canada, and they say colder weather than normal. Remember, I talked about that kind of mini ice age that is possible in Europe and then also in the Northeast United States, and unseasonable seasons. That is a seesawing of seasons. So, warm December, cold July. And then, of course, more winds that are prophesied and terrible storms to hit the East Coast. And we've seen that, of course, with Sandy.
Yeah, and, I've seen some strange stuff the last 5 years. I remember my last December I spent in Rochester, New York. We had the entire month of December was in the upper 60s, low 70s. That's just that's not right. It should be snowy and cold.
Just really off right now. I know that a lot of friends that I have the garden, they just say, wow, this was a crazy year. Finally, they're finally getting produce, but it took a long time. It was just a very cold year.
Yeah,
especially in the New York area.
May come to greenhouses.
Yeah, I think that might be where we're all going to be going. Here's an interesting one. Earth changes on the East Coast, but the U.S. East Coast is especially vulnerable to climate change, with major changes in weather in Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston. And again, there'll be the very drastic seesawing of the seasons again. Which leads us to, these are some interesting prophecies that I wanted to share. And this is more updated information from the spiritual teachers, where they talked about the migrations of people. Because not only will we have changes in climate, changes in coastline, changes in the way the weather patterns are and how crops are grown and all of that, we'll have major changes in population and where people will be living and where they will migrate to. So the first migration that they were very clear about is that they said that as the Baja Peninsula erodes, that this predicates a new wave of population migration. So this, they said, would be one of the very first migrations that we would experience. And that migration will move through Arizona and then into New Mexico.
Ooh. Okay.
And then migration number 2, and they say as people leave California due to global warming and climate change, that migration will then continue into Utah, Arizona, and Colorado. We're seeing some of that now, of course, but I think they're talking about a more intense migration.
Yeah, I mean, look at how things will be so dry in some of the mountaintops, and then all of a sudden this rain will come like it's Noah's Day, and mudslides come down and cover entire, towns.
Well, and not only that, I think that there'll be some areas that will be in complete isolation because we have to consider, too, transportation. That we could have a complete, not only a shutdown of our economy, but we'll also probably see at some point, if we do see the worst changes, we'll see some sort of shutdown in our transportation and just how food is transported, fuel is transported. If roads and highways and train stations and airports are not being maintained, how are we going to move things? We're not going to be able to. So there will be some areas that will go into complete isolation at times of changes. And this sort of relates to that, so I kind of wanted to preface that first before I got into migration number 3. Okay. They said that as Earth experiences changes in oceanic currents, and again, that's the thermohaline, migrations of the U.S. East Coast begin, and many people migrate into Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. Now, this is the interesting part. They said that many of these people from New York and Washington, D.C. migrate to these areas and help to form the nexus of many bright and thriving, sustainable, agricultural-based communities, because each community will have to become sustainable because they just won't have the resources that will be transported in.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
And the fourth migration, they say the East Coast migrations will also establish on the southern and eastern sides of the Great Lakes region. But they also say that Lake Michigan may break or flood. And I think that that's probably related to the New Madrid Fault. But what I thought was the most interesting, Michael, about the information on the migration is where people would not be migrating from.
Okay.
So those are the 4 migrations and the 4 patterns that they identified. So basically, it's the Southwest, there'll be huge migrations, and the Northeast, there'll be huge migrations, but not as many from the Northwest or from the Southeast.
And that's just the people who survive all this mess, who will be the ones migrating. I mean, I know some think of millions and millions of people migrating, and yeah, probably, but I think that, a lot of the population, as you mentioned earlier, will get wiped out because they're not going to be prepared. I mean, if the power is out and all this stops, just dead in the middle of winter, how many people are going to freeze to death?
Exactly. So, again, I hope that we don't see these worst times in order to experience the best that life has to give us. But I think it does help to know that these are possibilities and probabilities. And then we can use spiritual practice, prayer, in order to change these possible scenarios.
Oh, yeah, and I do a lot of that. I really do. And it pays off.
It does. It works.
It does. I don't know what it is about prayer, but it does work.
There's also positive prophecies as well. And I'd like to share this one about Canada. And they say that the interior lands of Canada will develop new agricultural crops to produce food for many in the new times. And many new types of grains that are of higher vibration are prophesied to be developed. And they say that eating of these grains will open the third eye, and that in that time, that grain will be known as the food of the gods, because it has the ability to hold and contain monatomic elements. And I don't know if you've ever studied much about monatomic elements, but monatomic gold it's a type of mineral that you can take into your body, and it actually will open your third eye chakra, and then allow you to perceive the fourth dimension and also have fifth dimensional experience.
Yeah, definitely going to have to be in touch with that third eye. Oh, yeah.
And I just thought that was interesting that a grain would actually be developed that would be utilizing that type of element.
Yeah, who knows? Some kind of herb. I believe Earth has it all. Whatever we need,
I do too.
It's here. Yeah. At
They
least
say
for
that
now.
the northern lands of Canada that are under permafrost will thaw, and that the west coast of Canada will go under ocean water. So it seems like most of the west coast of Canada and the United States and even South America are really, doesn't look good for them. But especially during massive earthquakes. And I think that might be the Pacific Rim, which people who've studied Atlantis and Mu and Lemuria, they think that that's probably what has caused that continent to rise and to fall, is the movement of that huge tectonic plate.
We have a listener who asked if you could repeat that last part again, and I think it's worth saying.
About the Pacific Rim.
Yeah.
It's actually, there is a map of tectonic plates that, Google it and you can find it and study that. And many of the ancient, or people who studied the ancient history of Mu and Lemuria, they theorize that it is the movement of the Pacific Rim that has caused those continents to come and to go.
Oh, and he says the atomic gold. He wanted to know more about that. Okay.
Yeah, monatomic. What you want to do is Google the work of David Hudson. He's the Phoenix area farmer, and he actually did all the research on that. And I'm not an authority on that, so I don't want to say any more about it. But just look up that, and you'll find quite a bit of information on the web about that.
All right, great. Next.
It's a higher dimensional type of mineral that once you take it into the body, it accelerates the whole Kundalini system, the human energy system.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. It really is, and there's a lot to it. Now here's another interesting prophecy for Canada, that there will come a time on Earth when Earth will experience continuous light, and this will be near Baffin Island. Now, I kind of let this prophecy kind of ramble around my head for a while, and then I realized after taking a trip to Alaska what they were talking about, and they're talking about that that's where the new pole is going to be, that it's going to be a pole shift. So if there's continuous light, it's likely because that's where the North Pole is going to be. And so this indicates a physical pole shift, and that's where the final resting place will be. And this is what the spiritual teachers say, that when this light appears, that it will signify the end of the tumultuous time of change of the Great Purification, and it will also lift the earth out of the Great Purification and into a greater state of knowledge and spiritual consciousness.
Well, let's hope some of that's right.
I hope it could happen today, and I think it can. It is all, of course, it's contingent on the types of changes, the types of choices that we make.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay. And what else we got?
Well, I've got interesting prophecies for Europe. And I don't usually get too deep into prophecies away from the United States and Canada just because most of us, we all want to know what's going to happen where we live. But I think it's important to know that the spiritual teachers have given information for those areas, and they say that 100 to 120 miles inland of the low-lying areas of Europe is a major depletion of coastlines due to global warming. And I thought that was kind of fascinating because I think they're discovering that already, that's what will happen.
And just to make it clear,
the melting of the ice cap.
Just to make it clear to everybody, these are the prophecies that were given to you by these spiritual teachers, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you send me a list of these, I'll post them under your links on the website and keep them there for people to see, because people are very interested in this stuff, as well they should be.
Well, and this is fascinating too, Michael. They said that through the warming of the climate and melting of the ice caps, that there would be flooding all throughout Europe. And, they had horrific floods this year all throughout Europe.
Yeah.
And they said that many European cities are prophesied to go under the ocean's waters, Rome, London, and Paris.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different prophecies that they shared. It's very, very clear that we're going to be up for a whole different world by the time all of this is done.
Oh, yeah, I believe we will. And again, we could see it happening. Believe me, I would love so much to just wave my hand at everybody who says all these changes are coming and say you're crazy. But I can't, because the proof is right before my eyes every single day.
Well, it seems like that we are having many of these changes, although I must admit myself, and I'm much more conservative for dealing with such radical information, I personally will be surprised if we will see it in our lifetime. But I do think that our children and our children's children will see these changes, and they will be dealing with this, and it will be a very, let me put it this way, it will be a way either to unify them or to divide them.
That's why it is important for all of us now to instill in our children the knowledge and the ability to overcome these things that we have so ungracefully allowed to happen. And it's
we really have through our non-sustainable practices, and that just seems to be systemic everywhere.
Yeah.
In our economy, in our food system, and just our whole way of life, and of course, our addiction to fossil fuels. And the solutions are there, but it seems to be more and more difficult to even apply the solution.
I don't know if it's as much an addiction to the fossil fuel as it is to the greed. I would agree with you on that.
Absolutely. This is an interesting prophecy in the Middle East. Of course, one thing that they always prophesied was some sort of a nuclear catastrophe in the Middle East. But I found this interesting. They said that they were not going to give specific prophecies just right now because there's so much turmoil in the Middle East that they really couldn't even read the collective consciousness. But they said in the next 2 years that more information will be released about what they see will happen in that area.
Okay. All right. And what else? You said you had 20 of them. And
well, I kind of summarized a lot of them.
Okay.
Of course, some of these we talked about already. They said that there would be a large earthquake in Europe. And they said that there's a fault line that runs from the Scandinavian nations down into Germany and south onto Spain. And then they said that new lands would emerge off of Spain and Portugal. And then this is sort of interesting. They said some of Europe will be under ice, some of the lands will be under water. And this gives a physical land of rest akin to a cleansing or a purification. So Europe floods and then ices.
And here's my biggest fear of all of this. And it's all pretty scary. I'm personally not scared of the changes that are coming. I mean, somebody's got to go through it. Why not me? That's why I'm here, I guess. But what really scares me is these nuclear facilities, these power plants that we have all over the planet. And we might be able to survive all the other stuff that happens, but now all those things melting down simultaneously, and I don't know. It seems pretty grim.
Yes, it does, because, of course, that can change and alter our DNA, and we may be living in totally different bodies if we reincarnate back on the Earth.
Yeah, 2 heads and 5 feet. And, I mean, I'm making fun of it, but that's true.
The recent news about Fukushima is grim.
Yeah.
I tried to cover some of that in my blog, trying to find reliable news sources about what is happening.
Oh, I know, and and it's so much worse. The mainstream media don't even touch it. They try to stay away from it because they're directed to.
Well, and Chernobyl was really a disaster as well that was not covered in our news media, and Fukushima is 10 times worse than Chernobyl.
Oh yeah, it's much, much worse, and it's going to get even worse yet because those containers are sinking into the ground. They're going to collapse. So.
And from what I understand is that some of the fishes now that they're catching off our west coast of the United States, they've been tested and they have cesium in them.
Yeah.
So, of course, I think I covered that. That would be on my blog, too, that would give the sources for that information as well.
Yeah, and people will say, oh, what's causing all these deaths with the birds and the dolphins and whales? Well, I could think of a couple things that might contribute to it big time, and certainly our poisoning the planet is not helping any of this.
So there's some people who believe that the earth changes are a way to handle all this. That is tabula rasa, clean slate.
Oh, and yeah, Earth is alive.
Going through this, it can wipe out this, lower mentality that wants to just destroy the Earth, and then it allows a new, pristine or fresh population to come forward, and who knows, perhaps maybe we'll do it again, but maybe we won't.
And, I believe that the Earth is kind of like the human body. We get some kind of virus or bacteria, and our immune system goes after it, some germ, and I think that the same thing happens here. We continue to make her sick, and her immune system's going to kick in. I think it is.
Yes, and she'll just shake us right off of her back.
Oh, yeah, like fleas on a dog.
Exactly. This is sort of interesting. The changes, this is, my interpretation of the spiritual teachers, are shown ahead of time so that we can bring these possibilities to our conscious awareness, exactly just what we're talking about right now, Michael, and enable us to make empowering or different choices now. And this is what they say. It is important to not keep our head in the sand. We must face what is in front of us.
Absolutely, we do. And, denying it's not going to make it any better. And, and I try to go away from this show without telling everybody that there's no hope. Some out there say, oh, there's nothing you can do. There's always something you could do. You should always have hope. We were given these minds because we're supposed to use them. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, I'll always have hope right to the very end. It's just who I am. If there's no hope, why bother writing books? Why bother doing radio shows? I mean, there'd be...
Why even talk about this if all it is going to be the end?
Exactly.
We're talking about this because we want to actually change what is actually prophesied. What is the possibility? What is the probability? And through actually changing the way that we may act, whether that be spiritual, whether that be just in how we treat our neighbor on a daily basis, how we interact in our own community, if that begins to effectuate a positive change in the world, then that has a trickle-down effect. And I think that it does indeed affect the earth. And we may not see the worst of these times. Instead, we may see more of the best of these times.
Yeah, and there's always that chance if we all come together and get on the same page here, maybe we can avoid some of this, and maybe it won't be as bad.
Well, I really think that because we did publish the I'm America map in 1989, that at that time we just felt such an urgency to share that. At that time, Michael, we didn't have any idea when the changes were happening. It seemed so imminent that they were going to happen within the next 10 years. And so we just got out there and shared the information. And I think just the fact that we even talked about it is what has shifted some of the energies now with the changes. And in fact, I have a few friends, I think they were kind of depressed that at 2012 we didn't see the end of the world. But actually, I was glad because I realized then that our consciousness had shifted enough to allow us, to have more years to try to change this mess we're in.
I have people who listen to this show who get mad at me if I don't agree that the world's going to end, and if I don't agree that there's some big giant dwarf star up there that's coming to get us. Now, but I don't dismiss it either. It's possible. There's evidence that points towards these things. So, I'm not totally against it, but I'm one of those, before I, pull the fire alarm, I like to have absolutely solid proof.
Me too.
Yeah.
And what I have learned through working with prophecy and these predictions for over 20 years now is there's just a lot of confluence and convergence of information. And I think that above all, is what we need to look at. And also study the science behind it as well, and then make our own plan of action. Again, it all gets back to our own inner guidance and where we're guided and directed spiritually.
That's right, and I had a very reliable source on the other side once tell me that there is a God. So I have no doubt about that. I have my own personal relationship with God, and for me, I don't care what religion people are. I don't care, if they worship rocks or what it is, as long as they're not hurting others and they're trying to do the right thing and helping others even, then I think they're on the right path.
Well, today everyone has their own truth.
Yeah.
And we must accept everyone else's truths as well. And that's the best way, I think, for us to cooperate and get along. And that cooperation is really what feeds life. Competition kills life. So if we say your truth is wrong and my truth is right, where does that take us? Back into polarity. But into accepting all the truths, we move into cooperation. I kind of would like to leave you with this because I think this is so positive, and this where we've been talking towards, Michael, is that the master teachers say that a new consciousness will ensue on Earth, and after the time of change, that's when we will enter into the time of cooperation. And they say this: proceed without fear and welcome the birth of the new time. Mm-hmm. I like that statement because it means that the new times could be right now.
Yeah. I do too. I have a colleague, Peter Kling. He says he's got a book, You Can Survive Armageddon, and and it's not the end of the world. It's a new beginning, and I like that idea.
We're at the beginning of the beginning.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. So why don't you tell everybody once again where they can get the book and any other information that you'd like to put out there. By all means, go right ahead. And if there's anything else you want to touch on, we've still got a few minutes if you like.
Okay, Michael. If they'd like to receive a free audio version of A Teacher Appears, they can go to that's IAM, IamAmerica.com or to LoriToye.org, and that's LORITOYE.org. If they want to get any information about the prophecies that we've shared and talked about in this program and some of the spiritual information as well, they can go to LoriToye.com. And I have tons of free information. And there they'll also find links to my YouTube station and also to my Earth Changes blog, which you can have really a great time going through and reading all the different news articles I've been collecting for the last 6 years on Earth Changes. Awesome. So there's a ton of information out there that we're offering.
Well, I'm glad that we crossed paths because very interesting. I love the book, and I would love to have you on again in the near future, and maybe you could give us some updates.
Absolutely. That would be terrific. I have 2 more books in this trilogy, so hope we get to talk about that then.
All right. Sounds good. And we've got you linked up over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com, and we'll keep you linked up. We'll put your links over on our link page for everybody to get to you. And I thank you very much for being on today.
Oh, thank you, Michael. It was a pleasure.
All
of 3,399, we'll have a full force of that galactic life.
And you said that we're being given the technology. Who's giving it to us?
Excuse me, what was that again, Michael?
I say you said that we're being given the technology, and I asked who's actually given us.
We're being given this from within because of this light. What it does is it stimulates our DNA, and it does several things in doing so. What it does is that it increases our lifespan, so we live for much, much longer. The other thing is that it helps our brain function, and so we are able to retain information. Therefore, we have a better memory function and a better intelligence function. Our intelligence is much, much better, and we're just more able to cognize and engage in critical thinking. And also, it helps us to have more reverence for spiritual information. That is our ability to develop empathy and compassion for the human condition.
Yeah, and that's something that we're definitely lacking. And I've been telling people right along, we need to come together. No matter what you think the end game is, we all need to come together. And the New World Order, these forces in power, they like to divide and conquer. And
well, it's almost as if this competition that we've all engaged in is actually very anti for the whole human experience. And of course, the master teachers, they say that as we enter into these new times, that we will really understand how scientifically important the law of love is, and we will enter into an age of cooperation, where we will actually learn oneness with the earth and also oneness with one another.
You know what I wonder, though, is how come every time we need to learn a lesson, we have to get destroyed?
It just seems that is the nature of being a human. And the good thing about crisis, though, is that it's often very unifying. And from that unification, we're able to always evolve things to a new level.
Absolutely.
And so even though we may go through these times of horrific and catastrophic change, it is also designed to help us evolve and to spiritually grow and to become more self-realized.
I see. Now, why do you suppose they came to you and told you this? Why you, and as have they been telling others?
Well, I ask that question a lot, especially in a teacher appears. I just had a very difficult time integrating the information. A teacher appears is actually two stories in one. It is my story of coming out of this very conventional, ordinary way of thinking and being exposed to a whole new way of thinking, which are these little teachings from the spiritual teachers, where they talk about transcendence, so they talk about unity, they talk about the age of cooperation, alongside our great need to change. And then also introducing how we can actually use meditation, visualization, and different spiritual techniques to raise our energy and actually come to understand the fourth and fifth dimension, which are their dimensions of experience. But of course, it took me a while to integrate. And in fact, I ended up reading the work 3 different times in the book, just because I had so much difficulty integrating the material.
I see. Yeah, it had to be difficult, explaining all of this. And I don't know, it's hard to say where we're headed. All I can say, I don't know what all the causes are, but we've got sinkholes as well. What's your thoughts on all these sinkholes that are happening?
Well, I don't know a lot about them, but I do know process. And in one of the chapters, I think it's about midway, I thought, well, what if this isn't of the light? And so I began to question the master teachers myself telepathically and saying, I want you to show me your light. And so readers can read those sections. And when I would do that, then they would, of course, show me their white, effulgent light. And so, of course, I proceeded without fear on that issue alone.
I see. Okay, good enough for me. So now, what causes our coastlines to be changed so drastically?
Well, the I'm America map is really a fascinating prophecy. And of course, prophecy is something that is always given to us ahead of time so that we can make positive changes now to possibly lessen or ameliorate their probability altogether. But it was a very drastic message. And the I'm America map itself shows major cities like Seattle and Los Angeles, Houston, Miami, New York, all underwater. And it wasn't so much that it was about the big one hitting California. What they did is that they described a series of events that they said could possibly happen. But again, they always say engendered, in your consciousness, in the choices that you make, is the ability to change this for the greater good. But they always would point out to us that we should look always in the series of events that they prophesied, reference points. And in the teacher appears, they were very clear about this. And what a reference point is is that it's a position in the landscape of the now, or the ever-present now, where one can evaluate away probabilities. And so they say, place your reference points so you can initiate comparison between these actual events, prophesied events, and then again the possibility of the timing. They did say, look for these events before the great purification or the great changes would happen, and they said to first look at how the United States economy is, because they felt that there would be some sort of an overall, not crash of the economy, but a total weakening of the U.S. economy that then would later on affect the entire world. The second thing that they said to look for is overall global warming. And they said that excess water in the ecosystem would cause a lot of problems with the spinning of the Earth. And that the spinning of the Earth and that excess water could cause activation of tectonic plates, and we'd end up getting worldwide earthquakes.
And of course,
last but not least, then they talked about a possible meteor that was coming to the Earth, and that its impact would also cause further activation of tectonic plates.
Now, did they say that it's possible this stuff happens, or because I mean, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is actually happening now as we speak.
Well, exactly, which is why I decided that I wanted to publish a Teacher Appears. It was a lot of ancillary material that accompanied the I'm America map, and in our eagerness 20 years ago to publish the Earth Changes material and then all the subsequent Earth Changes information that, came along with it, it kind of went by the wayside. Because we just felt like, well, this isn't as important to get out. But now I see that events are accelerating. We have seen several of these reference points, if you will, start to trigger off. And I just think it's very important to share all the information that is there. And The Teacher Appears is the first of a trilogy of that kind of beginning information to help people to spiritually grow and evolve and to deal with these times of changes.
I see, and I've got a lot more questions also, but have you been following? I just caught wind of it before I came on the air of latenightinthemidlands.com. Become a member, be informed, and inform others. And by all means, subscribe. You could do that right at the bottom of the main page. We've got subscriptions, one-time donations. We are listener supported, and we need you to support us for us to remain. And my guest is Lori Toye. After a few years away from the spotlight, internationally known author and channel Lori Toye takes us back to the beginning on how this life of enlightenment first began. In her latest book, Teacher Appears, Lori is once again making herself available for speaking engagements and radio shows. Her new book, A Teacher Appears, a very interesting read, and she's going to tell us more about her background and how she got on this journey. And then we'll take it from there. So, Lori, welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. Thank you so much.
Hi, Michael. Yes, thank you for having me as a guest on your show.
Oh, absolutely. I find this all very interesting, and I thought maybe we could start with you giving us a little more on the background and how did this spiritual journey begin for you?
Well, I am from an extremely conventional background. That is very typical. I was raised in the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church, and of course I had never heard about meditation, reincarnation, even the word channeling from my background. But I was 22 years old, and I was the manager for an advertising department of a small weekly newspaper in the Pacific Northwest, and I'd been asked to go pick up an ad. And so I went out to go get the ad at a health food store, and I walked in the door, and the woman at the counter pointed her finger at me, and she said, "You have work to do for Master Saint Germain." And I asked her, I said, well, I was a bit perplexed. I said, "Who's Saint Germain?" And she said, "Well, come here, I'd like to show you his picture." So I followed her to her back office, and there on the wall hung a picture of the Master Saint Germain. And he honestly looked like someone that I had known before, although there wasn't any way that I could have, because the picture was obviously 19th century France and someone that really was not a contemporary whatsoever. But for some reason, I felt like that I knew him and recognized him.
Fascinating.
And then I asked her, I said, well, who is he? And she said, well, Master Saint Germain is an ascended master. And I said, well, who is an ascended master? Or what is an ascended master? And she handed me a pamphlet about ascended master teaching. And that is when I began to study the ascended master tradition, and she actually became one of my first teachers of that tradition.
And what exactly is that? What are you? What kind of practice is it?
Well, ascended masters are beings just like you and I, souls who have evolved to a point in their evolution where they have spiritually liberated or ascended from the need to even have a physical body. So they exist in other planes or dimensions of reality, in fourth and fifth dimension. And they then pledge as a group to help to serve humanity, so that humanity can also spiritually grow and evolve in their own process here.
I see. Now, you waited quite a while to tell your story, from what I understand here, and I'm looking forward to hearing about it now. So you were able to actually connect. I know, was this on the other side? Was this connection?
Well, yes. Interestingly, when I began to study the Ascended Master tradition, of course, one of the major tenets is learning how to do meditation. And through meditation, of course, then you can not only open up the chakra system, but also open up your consciousness to new levels of seeing and hearing information. And through that process, I also read many of the biographies of the master teachers, which really display their overall archetypes of consciousness, but they were very beautiful stories about love, about loss, about courage, victory, all of these amazing stories that really inspired me. And that was in the mid-'80s when that happened, and I was really more or less in my studying phase of their tradition.
So is this something like out of body? I mean, do you actually leave the body?
Well, no. Trance technique is very, very different. Of course, there are some trance channelers who will leave their body. Like J.Z. Knight, I think, is one of the famous channelers who actually will step aside, and the deity Ramtha will actually use their body. But that is not at all the technique that I used at all. I was very good at meditation, and it would seem I was at a meditation class, and the meditation leader said, well, please tell me, what your experiences are when you're in meditation. I said, well, there's always spiritual teachers there whenever I'm meditating. And I didn't know, Michael, that was abnormal. And so I could carry out, in my own telepathic response with these teachers, my own educational process. I would ask them things about past lives. They would show me past lives, and also help me with different spiritual techniques just to help me to spiritually grow and evolve. And I remember when I shared that with her, she says, oh my gosh, well, you must be a channel. And at that time, I didn't even know what a channel was. But a good friend was attending the class too, and I had shared with him also a dream that I had had in the 80s, which was a very profound dream. And in that dream, 4 beings in white robes unrolled a map of the United States. But it wasn't your average, everyday looking map. It was a map with massive changes on the coastlines. Obviously, it was earth changes. Mm-hmm. And also, along with the earth changes on the map, there exuded this very high spiritual energy. And that was a very profound experience for me to see this map. So I'd shared that with him, that I had had this dream. And he was a student of Edgar Cayce, and he said, Lori, with your susceptibility to easily go into trance, do you think there's a chance that you could ask the master teachers or the spiritual teachers to show you the map again, and we could get some of the details of that map? And so that's exactly what we did. We agreed to meet in the early morning hours, and we had a little handheld tape recorder, and I went into a meditative state. And in that meditative state, I stayed totally in my body. And when the teachers would appear, then I would say, well, they're here. And then we would begin this process of asking them questions, me kind of going back and forth, almost like talking on the telephone would be the best way to describe it. But as the process ensued for me, and I was able to develop my ability to transmit information, it became much more seamless.
And now this is an area that I'm really interested in. So what type of events are we talking about here? How much can you rely on the information, obviously? Let's start here. There's always going to be those groups out there that feel like any kind of channeling is evil. Now, I don't feel that way. I don't believe that. I think it's, these are gifts to be able to do these things. But how do you know? How can you be sure the information you're getting is...
Well, in A Teacher Appears, this book describes totally my whole process of how I began to channel, actually how I integrated my...
The tsunami or giant tidal wave that hit China?
No, I didn't. I did try to get onto Google News right before the interview, but I hadn't seen that. What has happened?
Well, that's why I was asking you. I'm not sure. I got some friends in the chat who are saying China is pretty much going through some bad stuff right now. So I don't know. Maybe it's something we could check out on the break, I guess.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we're living in a time where a lot of massive changes are possible. I think the biggest change that we're facing right now, of course, is global warming, with 95% of all of our icebergs melting. That's very apparent what is happening. Of course, we all know that we've had these massive changes in our economy, and things are kind of held together, with threads. So we are living and entering, I think, into the time of change. Now, it's interesting because when they talk about the time of change, that could be a time that could be as short as 20 years or as long as 2,000 years. So it's almost like an epic, something that we're going to enter into, just a time of geophysical instability. And generation upon generation of people will be born into the time of change. And I don't really feel that we are there just yet, but I do think it's upon us.
There are a lot of changes. I mean, earthquakes are up, I don't know if it was 7,000%, I think somebody had told me yesterday. And then the storms, I mean, here in South Carolina, we've gotten rain continuously, all but maybe a few days for the last 3 months. So the weather's changing. Then we're hearing people worry about shark attacks. Well, now I find that there's these squids that are migrating because of the temperature changes in the water. I mean, people think about
because the thermohaline, which is, regulates by the salinity of the ocean water, that's also something we need to have major concern about, because as these freshwater glaciers and icebergs melt, then we are actually altering that whole ocean conveyor belt. And that is why the master teachers in Freedom Star, which is the world map for changes that we produced after the I'm America United States map, they actually talked about how some of Europe would plunge into a mini ice age during the time of great change.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about it, and obviously we've got a lot of changes happening here now. Some are, I guess a lot of people are saying that it's being caused by a celestial body out in space. Now, were you told anything about any kind of event like that?
Well, in subsequent work, they shared, of course, a lot about the galactic center, or the Great Central Sun, and the energy that emits from that. And that is it's a non-visible non-quasar type of light that actually helps us to evolve and grow, and it regulates the epochs of time in classic Puranic Hindu timekeeping systems. But as they would explain it much more simply, is that it is actually helping to start or ensue a golden age upon the earth. And I know it's hard to believe that we actually are in a golden age, but it's a tiny one. We are actually in what is known as Kali Yuga, which is more of a downward trend, but we get this little reprieve of 10,000 years that started in 1899. And so the galactic light is growing. And I think this is why we do have some technology that's being given to us right now that is freeing us. But overall, the quality of life for some people, it really is not there yet.
And
but they do claim that when we reach the apex of that, which would be around